Is our reality a simulation? An actual matrix? Can we finally prove there's life after death? And what about this alien UFO thing, really? There's a lot of cool, smart people working on this stuff, and I'm talking to them. Let's take the time to really explore bigger questions. When Gregg Braden arrived, I was totally stoked. I was really happy that he was going to take the time to sit down with us. And I could tell that he was a little bit unsure about the interview and about me and about where the conversation was going to go. But once we really started talking, we got down deep into some serious bigger questions. Hi, I'm Ron James, and this is another edition of the Sedona Scene. With me today is a legend in the conscious movement, the author of such books as The Divine Matrix and The God Code. Thank you for joining us, Gregg Braden.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So Gregg, you've got a scientific background, and that has helped you to find your way into doing a lot of the work in the spiritual realm in today's movement. Can you tell us a little bit about where it all began and what got you to this point?
Sure. You know, when people ask me that question, it often comes across as how did you make the leap, what many people consider to be the leap between science and spirituality. And it's always an interesting question for me because even as a child, I never made a distinction between the two. For me, science and spirituality have always been very closely related. I always believed that when we study science, when we study chemistry, biology, geology, physics, ultimately we're studying the mechanism of how our physical world works, and beyond that, the nature of the creative force underlying that physical world. And it's just that people didn't talk about it. That's what I used to think as a child. And when I got into the corporate world, what I found was nothing could be further from the truth. When we would have conversations around the water fountain about the inner workings of reality, what I found was that the sense is the two are mutually exclusive, that we must follow either the path of science or the path of spirituality. And if we follow one, it excludes, by definition, the other. And to be honest, I think that's probably where we've gotten into some of the problems that we find as a society and as a civilization today. Because they're both good. They both work in very, very different ways. Science tells us how things work. It gives us the nuts and the bolts. But the spirituality or the human experience tells us how we apply those understandings in our lives. So why this is so interesting to me, science, and I was trained as a scientist, and I support the scientific method, and science is a relatively young language that describes our world. It's only been around for about 300 years, since the time of Isaac Newton. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the spiritual traditions have been around 5, 6, 7,000 years in the case of the Hindu Vedas. And for 300 years, the scientists have been arguing among themselves as to whether or not we have any effect upon the physical world around us, and as to whether or not there's a force that connects everything in the universe. While for 5,000 years, this is the place where these ancient traditions began. They began with the understanding, it was a given. They said, of course everything's connected. So for 5,000 years, they've been experimenting and teaching and training themselves to understand how we apply the fact, and it is now a scientific fact, that we are connected to everything in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. So for me, where we find ourselves in history today is in the presence of what the experts are telling us are unprecedented challenges in our lives. There's no template to help us to understand what it is that's happening today. And I believe that we have created the conditions, maybe not consciously, but we now find ourselves within the conditions that are pushing us to come full circle from the science back to the spiritual understandings, marrying the two together into a greater wisdom so that we can survive what we've created in our world. And the only way to do that is to understand who we are in our relationship to the world. So that's a long answer to a short question, but it kind of helps to lay the foundation, I think, for everything we're doing today. So for me, when I had the opportunity to go into the corporate world, as a scientist, for me it was a very spiritual undertaking, although it wasn't presented that way, and it's just something we didn't talk about a lot.
So was the consensus among scientists that there was a potential for spiritual fusion? It just wasn't talked about in the scientific realm?
You know, it's everyone works differently, and the corporations and the corporate world were good to me, and I want to be really clear about that. I learned a lot working in that world about the way that we share information and how people expect to learn new things. Part of my job was training Air Force cadets on Star Wars software, and this was new back in the last years of the Cold War, late 1980s. And I learned a lot about the way people think. And many of the brilliant scientists and engineers, their focus was so great upon simply the problems that were at hand that they really, if they did have these beliefs, they didn't speak about them openly. On the one hand. Now on the other hand, one of the ironies of the new sciences like quantum physics is that the deeper the scientists get into the physics of our world, the more spiritual their understandings become, because they begin to recognize that there are forces working in the quantum level that in some respects seem to violate the very laws of physics as we've come to understand them today. And even the names of the particles. When we were in school, there were electrons, protons, and neutrons, and we thought that was tough, and those days are long gone. And now we're looking at gravitons and gluons and muons and mesons and quarks. And the quarks, the names of the quark subparticles that we're now looking at have become very spiritual. They're like truth quark and beauty quark and strange quark and up quark and down quark. For every one of those, there's an anti-particle, an anti-truth, anti-strange. And that when I began to hear these, those are more spiritual sounding names than they are technical, scientific sounding names. So whether it's acknowledged openly, the very direction that the science is leading us is to such a deep understanding of our reality that we are hard-pressed not to have a deep appreciation for this underlying force that seems to be directing all these particles.
Now we've come to a point of understanding where we pretty much know that we can affect our reality. We can go and we can co-create our universe with each other, and we can also create our own personal experience. But then also there's talk of limits or no limits, extremes, what can and cannot be done in the process of doing this creation. In other words, I can create my reality, but can I walk outside and see purple grass? Because I want there to be purple grass, and I believe there'll be purple grass, or something along those lines.
Sure.
And so, what do you think, if any, are the barriers to how far we can go with our conscious creation of our own personal reality?
That's a good question. This is precisely where we are today. We're witnessing events. For me, it's the relevance. All of this is meaningless unless it has relevance in our world. So we're facing unprecedented challenges to our civilization in terms of climate, depletion of resources, energy, the very real possibility of a global war, and the threat that war could actually be a nuclear war. While our ancestors may have faced one or another of these challenges in the past with the weather and the climate and depletion of resources, what makes our time in history so unique is that all of these conditions are occurring simultaneously in one generation, one period of time, and we've never seen that. We've never seen it with 6.2 billion people on the planet. So it's those conditions, I think, that are pushing us to answer the very question you've asked. There's no doubt in the scientific community that we affect our reality. And the articles, very prestigious journals of Nature, for example, are publishing articles, and the title tells the whole story. Observation affects reality. I mean, this is what they've found. So there's no question that it happens. The question is as to the degree. How much do we affect our reality? How much power do we have to change our bodies, to change our lives, to change our world? And the answer is a very non-scientific answer, because what we're finding is that we have as much power as we choose to claim in our lives. What the new studies are showing is that our world is made of, as we've known for a long time, electromagnetic energy, electrical and magnetic fields. That has been known. What the new studies are showing is that the human heart is the strongest biological generator of electrical fields and magnetic fields in the human body. So our heart has the ability to generate the very fields that the stuff of our world is made of. And our own physics textbooks say if you want to change the stuff of reality, you have to change either the electrical field or the magnetic field, and there's a term for both. The Stark effect and the Zeeman effect allow us to change the electrical and the magnetic fields. So our own science is telling us that. So what the discoveries now are showing is that when we have a feeling in our heart, we are actually creating the electrical and the magnetic waves that change the quality of the atoms of our world. They literally interrupt the flow of space and time and rearrange the stuff this world is made of. And to the degree that we are trained and condition ourselves to do that, to that degree do we affect our reality. For some people it's minimal, for some people it appears miraculous. And we've seen miraculous appearing events, the healing of tumors inside of a living human body in less than 3 minutes from individuals who were trained practitioners who've been trained to focus and hone these feelings in their heart. And their feelings in their heart are literally changing the biology of someone who's consented and invited that change into their lives. The bottom line to all of this, and this is what the ancient traditions always said, is that we're invited to feel the feelings inside of our heart for the things that we would like to experience in our lives, to feel as if they've already happened, rather than asking for them to happen and feeling powerless in our world, which we all do from time to time, and there's nothing wrong with asking for intervention. But what the science is showing us and what the texts, 5,000-year-old texts, left us instructions, very clear instructions, and they said when you would like to change your body or change your world, rather than feeling what you don't have, feel as if it's already happened. And that didn't make a lot of sense to us. It sounds like hocus pocus to a scientist until we understand that when we have that feeling, what we're literally doing is creating the electrical and the magnetic template. It's the blueprint in our heart that the quantum stuff of our universe congeals around to give us the reality that matches what it is that we've felt. And while we all do it subconsciously from time to time, I think we're reaching a time in history now where we recognize that we're a family on this planet, and that when we come together in cooperation, not that we impose our will or control or manipulate our reality. That's not what this is about. The physicist John Wheeler, the colleague of Einstein, has called it participation. He said we participate in creating the kind of reality that we choose to have, whether it's the biology of one human body or the peace between nations in a broad geographic area. We now know that we are part of all of that, and the role that we play is directly determined by our willingness to accept our role as part of that. And it changes everything. It changes everything because for 300 years of science, we've been conditioned to believe that we're separate from the world, that we have very little power upon anything that happens in our world, that we are victims of whatever life brings our way, and we just do the best we can do and hope for the best outcome. And all that now is beginning to change, and it's our own science that's catching up in a language that we trust, the language of quantum physics and science. They're catching up with the very principles that say precisely the same things that have been here for, in some cases, 5,000 to 6,000 years. So it's bringing those two ways of knowing, two great ways, science and spirituality, weaving them together into a single wisdom that's greater than either of them are together, and helping us to become better people, create a better world, and hopefully address the challenges that we're finding in our world. It's a very exciting time.
So when we talk about the actual evolution of man as a species, we started off with ancient traditional beliefs and lessons that taught us about the nature of reality, the illusionary nature of this world we're living in. And then when we say we've, in a way, come full circle, actually we've kind of gone through a complete transformation where we split in science and spirituality, and then these two are actually coming back together.
And so we rejected many of those ideas.
Back to the same
Absolutely.
spot.
We came from a place of accepting those ideas to a place of rejecting them, and now reintegrating them. However, we're doing it in a language, a different language, one that we seem to, at least in the West, when I say we in the West, that we're more comfortable with, and we've grown to depend upon to explain to us how our universe works. It's the language of science. But this is what's so interesting. The science now is only arriving at the place where many of the ancient traditions began. And the keystone to all of this is the fact, and it is now a scientific fact. It's no longer a theory or a hypothesis or a New Age concept, that there is an intelligent field of energy that underlies our physical reality. Now we know that field is there. It's been documented. It's what's called a non-conventional field of energy. It doesn't work like electricity, so we've never had the equipment to measure it. We were trying to measure it with equipment that measures things like television signals and radio waves, and the energy doesn't work that way. So it was only in the late 90s, early 2000s that we really had widespread access to the technology to measure these things. There were pioneers in the late 1800s, Tesla, Rife, people who had gleamings of insight into how our world works, and they were telling us this, 100 years ago. But widespread in the academic and peer-reviewed papers, this has only become accepted within the last few years. So we're only arriving at the place where these ancient traditions began. And this is where the science and the spirituality, I believe, really can serve one another. Because the scientists say, okay, there's a field out there, and it connects everything. We influence that field, and they're saying, what do we do with it? They're scratching their heads. They're saying, what do we do with it? The ancient traditions and our most cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions, they started from that place. They said, yeah, everything's connected. And they said, by the way, here's how you can apply it in your lives to become better people, to heal your bodies, to bring peace between tribes or nations, literally to influence weather patterns. What we now know is that high pressure systems, low pressure systems are influenced by strong magnetic fields. And when many people get together, feeling feelings of rain in their heart, I'm not going to say it creates the rain, it influences the conditions that can bring rain to pass. A lot of people ask me, they say, well, Greg, you're talking about having these feelings in the heart. We thought that your thoughts create your reality. You hear that a lot. So isn't it the thoughts that are really doing this? Well, thoughts are important, but this is the new part. The new studies are showing that the human brain also creates electrical and magnetic fields, but they're relatively weak compared to the heart. The heart is about 100 times stronger electrically than the human brain. And the heart is about 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the human brain. So if we're going to create an electrical or a magnetic field that affects our reality, it probably can be done with thought, and that's why it's so much more difficult. It's much easier to feel the feeling with our hearts. So our brains create the image. We model, we simulate with our brain. What is it we'd like to see? What is it we'd like to experience? And once we have that locked into place, we can feel the feeling of gratitude and appreciation for what has already happened and give power to what it is that we're thinking. And this is a very powerful internal technology that apparently was lost to the West about 2 centuries ago. And the instructions now are just now being found in many of the texts that have been recovered in the last 100 years. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic libraries, the Tibetan libraries. They have preserved the instructions in their texts that tell us how to use this very powerful inner technology. Now our science is catching up with it.
So that's like actually being in the experiential moment has more power than thinking and manifesting the moment, just because you're more connected in the now to the conscious stream.
Absolutely. So you asked earlier about how much power we may really have in the world. What we know, when scientists observe quantum particles, the stuff that makes the reality of our world, quantum particles seem to violate the very laws of physics as we know them today. A quantum particle can be in one place, or it can be 2 places at the same time. It can be many places at the same time. And no matter where those quantum particles are, they are always in communication with one another. One always knows where the other one is and what the other one's doing. Quantum particles communicate with themselves throughout time. A quantum particle in the present can actually change something that is happening in the past and allow it to manifest differently into the present. This is what our own physics are telling us. The reason that's important is because we're made of those particles. We are those particles. So we have to ask ourselves, are the capabilities that those particles demonstrate, the seemingly miraculous capabilities that they demonstrate in the laboratory, are they limited only to the laboratory? Are they possible for us? Because we're made of those particles, and if they are, what is it that stands between us and experiencing those miracles? And the answer, as scientists now are beginning to understand, is consciousness. It's our belief. It's the way we feel, the limitations that we have accepted culturally, through our families, throughout history. What science has told us, we have tended to give great credence to our limits, rather than thinking of ourselves as empowered beings. And whether we're consciously aware of it or not, the subconscious belief that we're powerless victims in this world just has a tremendous influence in everything we do. Even very conscious people spent their lives in ashrams and in a cave meditating in a monastery, halfway around the world at 17,000 feet above sea level. There are places within their being where the theme of being a powerless victim plays such a dominant role in their lives that stands between them and their greatest capabilities as well.
So we're looking at a lot of different components that go into the complete process of actually being able to manifest reality. There's the heart experiential component, there's the thought component, there's the choice component, there's probably a whole lot of other smaller components that we don't have time to touch on.
Sure.
But the one we haven't really delved into that I think is one of the most important is the belief component.
It is. So let's touch upon each of those components just briefly. In the minds of our viewers, in the whiteboard of our viewers' minds, if we can imagine, probably everyone watching this program is familiar with energy systems and the chakras of the human body, the energy discs that show up in many of the ancient drawings. In the Sanskrit traditions, which is the root of many of the things we're talking about today, what we find is a system of 7 chakras, 7 energy systems, 3 lower ones, the heart, and 3 upper centers here. And these centers in the Sanskrit traditions are linked directly to the components that you're talking about and we're conversing about for manifestation. The upper 3 energy centers are linked to what we would call our thought processes or our communication processes, and the lower 3 are linked to what we would call emotion. And they define emotion a little bit differently than we do. They say that there are 2 primary emotions that we are capable of, and those are love is one of those emotions, and then whatever we believe the opposite of love is, on the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's like 2 polarities of the same energy. So for many people it's love and fear. So they say that the way we work in this world, the way we manifest, is in our upper centers, we think, we communicate, we speak with someone else what it is, we verbalize what we would like to experience, we imagine in our mind. That's the thought. And an affirmation is a thought only. And it's an empty thought unless we put some energy into it. And the way we put that energy into it is by pumping, imbuing the energy of these lower energy centers, our love for what we're thinking, or subconsciously our fear of what we're thinking. And when we do that, when we marry the thought and the emotion together, they come together in this mysterious, magical, precious place right in the center of our hearts. And this is what the ancients say, this is where the action is. It's in our hearts, and by definition we create a feeling. Feeling is the union of thought and emotion. The feeling is what creates the waves that speak to the field, the matrix in our universe. The feeling is what creates. So unless we have imbued our affirmation with the emotion of our love for our perfect mate that's manifesting now, or our abundance, or our healing, or the healing of our loved ones, they may become just an empty thought. And for people who became frustrated with their affirmations, they said their affirmations 100,000 times a day and nothing happened, and then they lost interest, they felt disempowered, they felt like victims. They said, that stuff doesn't work. It's because we only had half of the formula. So the feeling is what actually creates, and that's why, to me, it makes tremendous sense. If the feeling is what creates, then you've got to give that field something to work with so it can show you what it is that you're creating, why not feel what it is that you'd like to experience so the field can give that back to you, rather than feeling the things that you don't have or you don't want, because that's the blueprint that the field gives back to you as well. It's a very subtle, it's this little subtle shift from into thinking from the outcome rather than thinking from the place of lack and hoping something changes. So the feeling that we're creating is very closely associated with what we call belief. Belief and feeling both occur in the heart. When you have a belief about something, you've got usually really strong feelings about that belief. You take some of the most controversial topics in our society today, abortion, assisted suicide, right to die, euthanasia. And anytime you bring those topics up, there are a lot of feelings that go around the beliefs of what we have with that. So they're very closely related. So you ask the question, is it important to believe? Yes, it is. To the degree that we believe we are healed, to that degree, when we begin creating those kinds of patterns in our bodies, our heart will send the signals to our brains saying this body is healed. And to meet that, the brain will flood the body with the chemistry that will allow that healing. We've seen this documented medically. So that's inside of our bodies. The same principle now is being documented beyond our bodies. So the effect is not limited to our bodies. The field carries those effects beyond our bodies into our physical world, and in that way we influence. Again, I'm not going to say the word control or manipulate. We're not imposing our will, but we do influence. We have the ability to influence the outcome of the events in our lives, individually and collectively. And some of the large-scale experiments have shown this. There were individuals in the the first Lebanese-Israeli war was in the early 1980s. And it was during that time researchers in the TM traditions, the city tradition of TM, trained 200 practitioners and a lot of things, but the bottom line was they had become peace in their bodies. They weren't hoping for it or wishing for it or praying for it. They embodied that peace. And they stationed them in the war-torn area in the Middle East. Statistically, what happened during the time those people were feeling peace is beyond coincidence, because the terrorist activities stopped altogether. Violent crimes against people declined. Emergency hospital room visits declined. Traffic accidents declined. That's what I was going to say. And when the practitioners stopped what they were doing, all those statistics reversed. And they did it again and again and again to make sure it wasn't a fluke. And they did it so many times, they were able to actually apply a mathematic formula to how many people were required to jumpstart the effect of peace in a geographic area. And it was a very small number. That the formula was the square root of 1% of a population. So what that means, if you don't have your calculator, our viewers don't have their calculator with them right now, that in a city of 1 million people, 1 million people, the square root of 1% is just about 100 people. And on a planet of 6 billion people, the square root of 1% is just under 8,000 people. And what it means is that number is required to kind of kickstart the momentum. Obviously, the more people that participate, the more accelerated the effect. But the bottom line is it doesn't take that many people who really know the language of the heart that can speak effectively to our reality to create change in our world that can benefit everyone. And I think that may be where we're going today. Is we all know what happens. We've lived in a world of fear and separation, for hundreds of years now. We know what kind of a world that creates. And I think people are ready all over the world. I've been in every continent of the earth, with the exception of Antarctica, in the last 5 years. And not necessarily governments, but people are ready for something more than the suffering and the war of the last 100 years in the 20th century. They're ready. They're ready for peace. They recognize that we're a family. And I think the people will make that choice before the governments catch up.
Now, that's interesting that we touch on governments, because it seems that, conspiracy theory is rampant, so you can go down that rabbit hole as deep as you want.
You want to talk about some?
We could, yeah. Do you think that there's actually an active force working through government that is doing everything they can to prevent this evolution? Because it's almost like on an official level throughout almost every nation, you don't have this acknowledgement. There's nobody running for president right now that really acknowledges this kind of stuff.
No, but you know, the interesting thing, you look at in the year 1997 and 98, you look at the governments of the nations where the leaders are up for re-election right now. And many of them are the governments of the nations that have been involved in the solving problems in the early 21st century using the methods that were solved in the 20th century. They're using Cold War methods, it's a World War II, Cold War mentality. It worked at one time in our lives. My sense is, it's a two-part question, my sense is that as a civilization and as a planet, we've outgrown the need to solve our problems that way, but not everyone has reached that conclusion at the same time.
Well, I think just what's happening in Iraq, it's pretty much proving that you can't go in with traditional ideas of conflict and make that work.
Absolutely, absolutely. When we begin speaking about governments, we could probably do a whole program, because what we know is for every government, there is no one government. There are governments within governments. Some agencies are aware of others, some are not. The term government changed radically during World War II. It was the first time we'd ever had the threats, the first time that the United States of America had been involved in, to the degree and to the magnitude in global events that they had, and other governments found themselves in similar positions. So when we say government, what I've come to understand is not everyone in the government knows what everyone else is doing. Not everyone understands what everyone else is doing. I worked in the defense industry, which is they were government organizations, and they were very compartmentalized. And to me, it was a tremendous insight in our little microcosm of a government, how larger governments may work. And it was kind of like this. I was a software developer, and I would get a piece of software that someone else had already worked and massaged. I never saw the beginning of the program, and I would get my little piece, and they'd say, your job is to make this information do this, and I would do that, and then I would hand it off to someone else, never knowing how my software was going to be applied, or who developed it, or where it was coming from. And I think our government, in some respects, is compartmentalized in that way. And I'm not saying that's right, wrong, good, or bad. It's the way it has evolved. And so compartmentalized, I think many may not be aware of everything that's happening in other places. One of the reasons I say that is we've had people from the government agencies, come to our programs on their own, out of curiosity, saying, what in the world is going on? What's happening in the world? There's a sense that maybe at one time somebody was in control, and that control, something's gone awry. I think there's that sense. And to me, it's a very empowering time, because the most difficult time to make change is when everything is settled and set and fixed and buttoned down. And we're finding ourselves at a time in our planet's history when it's just the opposite. It's like everything's up for grabs. Consciousness, and we're all linked into the same field of consciousness. Right. And if our listeners remember when the end of the Cold War, when that wall fell, now to us it looked like it happened, because we watched it on CNN, looked like it happened overnight. There were some things behind the scenes, but in a relative sense it happened pretty quick. And I believe we're very rapidly approaching a time where something similar is going to happen with us. We're going to wake up and we're going to look at one another and say, what were we thinking?
Right, right.
And part of what I think is driving that is because collectively our planet is moving in to a series of conditions that we've never faced before. And I think those conditions will transcend the little differences that we face among ourselves, and we'll recognize, and I think we're doing it now, that we need one another to survive what it is that we're experiencing. And I think that may be, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad. I just think it's kind of the way things seem to be going right now. And it's very, very interesting.
It is very interesting. One of the things that, there's a lot of different theories about what's going to happen in the next few years.
Sure.
What the significance of 2012, which goes back to a lot of different teachings and modalities.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that's being floated is that people are going to actually experience a completely different shift of reality based on their mindset at the time. If you're embracing a concept of interconnectivity and something that embraces a peaceful coexistence, then you're going to experience a reality where that happens and that the Earth averts the major disasters. And then if you're still in a more primitive mindset, or it's, you know, the war, then you're going to experience some of the more major cataclysms.
Right.
Do you think that's possible, that there could actually be a complete split?
What I believe is possible is this. First of all, I believe that no one knows for certain, and there are a lot of ideas about what's going to happen, and I think that's the beauty of our species, is the diversity, because we all think differently. You know, if we all thought the same way, exactly the same way, we all agreed on everything, and we all made the same decision to act one way in the presence of a great planetary challenge, and that decision was wrong, we'd be sunk. Right. But that'll never happen, because we all think differently, we feel differently, and our diversity, the ideas that we bring to the table, is where our strength as a species really is. So I welcome the diversity of ideas and possibilities, just in general. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I think it's good that we have a lot of ideas out there. What we know is this, is that we are part of our Earth. We're not separate. We are made of the same elements this Earth is. The bottom line, and I can say it as a geologist, I can say it as a scientist, the bottom line is whatever happens to the Earth is happening to us. So if we really want to understand what's going on, we can look at what's happening to the Earth. We know that the magnetic fields of this planet are dropping dramatically and rapidly. They reached a peak 2,000 years ago. They've never turned back. We are at the lowest magnetics now than we have been in the last 2,000 years. That is a scientific fact. We also know that the magnetic fields of this Earth are directly linked to human consciousness. On 9/11, we had 2 geosynchronous satellites measuring the magnetic fields of the Earth that showed tremendous spikes on 9/11. Well, the Earth's field was changing because it is part of us. When we had our spikes of emotion with our hearts, that field in the atmosphere was actually measuring human response. And this is an outrageous discovery, because it tells us, beyond the metaphor of the Gaiam concept, where people like to think that we're part of our world, that we are literally so intimately linked to this planet that the atmospheric magnetic fields are actually registering our extremes of emotion. And what that tells us is that when we all choose to feel collectively love, compassion, and peace, that our planet's going to mirror that, and everyone's tied into it. It's not just the few doing it. And it also tells us that when the planet's magnetic fields are going through their fluctuations, we're influenced. And we are. We know that our sleep patterns, our immune response, our cognitive abilities, all of those things, our ability to create optimum hormonal levels in our bodies, all are linked directly to those magnetic fields and the way that we feel about our world. So if Earth's going through a change, we're going through a change as well. And I think, while the specifics may vary, what we can say in general is those who are comfortable with themselves and trust the process of life, and have lived their lives to the best of their ability, reconciling in their hearts the challenges that life brings to them every day. If we've done that, I think that's how we tune ourselves to this planet. If we resist the change that life brings to us every day, if we resist and feel like we've got to control everything around us, when we lose that control, life can get pretty tough. And in general, I think that's what we're seeing. Whether or not we actually have 2 different camps remains to be seen, I think. Next couple of years, I think, are going to tell the story. Next couple of years, if you're talking about 2012, I think there seems to be this momentum toward war, for example, and war can only happen if we agree to it in consciousness. And I think it hasn't been chosen yet. I think we're in that decision-making process right now, and I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing, because, as I said, the people of this world don't want war. There's a few people in the government, in governments, that believe that that's the way to solve the problems. But they're tied into the same field of consciousness that everyone else is, and I mean, for everyone, I honestly believe everyone is doing the best they can do and doing what they think is best for this planet. The people I've talked to, we just have very different ideas about what's best for the planet and what's best for the people on this planet. And that, I think, it's about humans learning to work together more than about struggling with you know, what it is that's happening to the Earth itself.
Let me run something by you.
All right.
There's a concept that I've been toying with, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but as the quantum nature of reality becomes more and more obvious, then also the perception that positive and negative can exist both in the same state at the same time. It's the whole basis for the quantum computer and things that we probably don't have time to talk about. But it also creates the basis for things to be both true and false at the same time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And to me, as we begin to accept that, as we say, okay, you believe something, I believe something, they're completely different, but they could both be true. And that actually opens a door to understanding and acceptance that's never been opened before via a route that's never really been taken before. Because traditionally, any argument would be, I'm right or you're right. It's my way is the truth or your way is the truth. And so we've built this whole planetary situation of division based on belief systems.
Sure, entire civilizations are based on the polarity, on the belief that it all boils down to our relationship to what we call the forces of light and dark, right and wrong, good or bad, or good and evil, all of those kinds of things. People have told me in the past, I've had people email me or write me and say, you know, I only associate with light workers and people of the light, and I won't have anything to do with someone of the dark. And the first question I'll ask them is, how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between that light and that dark? And the minute they answer that question, they've fallen into the ancient trap that keeps us locked into the polarity, because the only way to do that is through a judgment. Now, you can discern light and dark. Say, you know, I prefer not to hang out with these people and not to do what they do because it's not for me. That's different than saying these people are dark, evil beings, and there's a whole feeling and mindset that goes with that. And I think what we're finding is we need both. We live in a world of polarity. We cannot exist in this world without the pluses and the minuses, the light and the dark, the boys and the girls. It's all about opposites. So it's less about judging one or another and more about choosing our relationship to both. Choosing our relationship to both of those. And quantum physics is helping us to do that. Quantum physics is telling us just what you said. The great question in physics, are we passive observers in this universe, or are we powerful creators? The answer is yes. We are both passive observers and powerful creators. It's determined by what it is that we accept about ourselves. What are our beliefs in the world? If we believe that we are part of all that we see and we employ those beliefs, we become powerful creators. If we believe that we are powerless victims, then we'll sit back and we won't exercise that part of our being, and things will appear to happen all around us, and we will always see ourselves as victims, and both are happening at the same time.
So how important do you think that collectively reaching an understanding that, simply paraphrased, it's all a lie and it's all true at the same time?
It's all about judgments.
And how important do you think really collectively reaching that understanding and implementing it into how we interact is?
I think what we're reaching the understanding of is dropping the two words on the end of those two sentences. Rather than saying it's all a lie and it's all true, we're simply saying it all is.
Perfect.
And when we say it all is, it encompasses all possibilities. And I think that's the beauty of our experience here. Everything is possible. And it is up to us to choose, to consciously choose what it is that we'd like to experience in our world. If we want a world of peace, if we want healing in our bodies, if we want to live to be 140 years old, as the scientists now tell us that we're designed to do, if we want to avoid a global war, there are 6.2 billion plus people on this planet. That's where the power really lies. And we are all linked through a single field of energy that's been called everything from the quantum hologram to simply the field, to the mind of God, to the matrix by the father of quantum theory, Max Planck. He called it the matrix. Now it's being called the divine matrix. We know that field is there, and it embodies three ways of existence. It fulfills three purposes in this experience that we're having. Number one, the field is the container within which all things occur. So that there is, our physicists believe, is nothing is occurring outside of this field. It means that we're all part of whatever it is that's happening. There's no them and us. There's a we. And the people making decisions about where our lives and our country go, they are part of the same field that we are, and we all have a vote. We all have a vote because of that, number one. Number two, this field when we wonder how our prayers or our good feelings or thoughts or wishes inside of our bodies reach our loved ones in the battlefield of Iraq, halfway around the world. You know, how's a prayer get over there? This field is the answer to that. The field is the conduit. It's the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And it has many miraculous properties. This field is holographic. What happens one place happens everywhere. So when you feel the feeling of peace and safety for your loved one on the couch in your living room, and give thanks of gratitude and appreciation for that feeling, your loved one's already received that. You don't have to send it anywhere, because that's the way the field works. And the third principle is that the field is a mirror. It literally is a quantum mirror. We project the template of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, what it is that we'd like to experience through our heart. We create those fields we talked about earlier, the electrical and the magnetic fields. We create those, they're patterns. We create them in our hearts, and they extend over a mile beyond our bodies, is what the studies are showing. It's not just in a room. And the stuff, literally the quantum stuff that our universe is made of, congeals, crystallizes, if you will, around the blueprint or the template to become the relationships and the careers and the joy or the success or the suffering of our lives. And in this way, these three principles, it is the container, number one. Number two, it's the bridge. Number three, it's the mirror. And when we really get what that means, everything changes. And not every human on the face of the earth must have a technical left brain understanding of this is just my language. But when we really get that the joy in our everyday lives and the love for our families is really where it's at, then that becomes the template that not only locally, but collectively, it contributes to our collective answer to this time in history. And this is what the ancients have been saying. Native Americans, we're here in Sedona, I live in northern New Mexico. We're surrounded by indigenous traditions and wisdom. They've said this for 400 or 500 years, and in a little bit different way. So our own science is now catching up with that. So when we embrace our relationship to our world and the universe around us, I think that is when we feel empowered to choose. And I believe the conditions of the world and of our country specifically, and the world in general, whether it's 2012 or abrupt weather change or you know, the war or whatever it is, I think those conditions are pushing us out of our comfort zone to a place where we must embrace the truth of our relationship. Our science is giving us the language, the ancient traditions are giving us the techniques. We're embracing the truth of our relationship, and it's not something that we can simply do as an after-dinner conversation. It now is crucial to our survival of what it is that we've created, and in that way we come full circle. The only way we'll survive what we've created is to accept our role in the universe. And well, I couldn't think of a more exciting time to be.
It's an amazing time.
Alive, yeah.
I often think that if I was a extraterrestrial culture and I was observing the evolution of Earth over an accelerated time schedule, and we go back to our most ancient barbarians to where we are now, there's arguments that we haven't really evolved, but I don't buy that a bit. I think that as we started out as little children and we're growing up into such fine adults, and I honestly believe that there's a very positive outcome for humanity.
I believe there is too. I saw a great cartoon. If you were an alien coming from another part of the universe into our solar system, in this cartoon, that right on the edge they had some signposts out there that said, you know, danger, war zone, come back after 2012, and they might want to hang out there for a while because it's a very volatile situation. But in the volatility, again, when I was in the corporations, every job, I worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies, Phillips Petroleum, Martin Marietta Defense Systems, and Cisco Systems, Communication Systems. And every one of those jobs, I always came in to projects that were behind schedule, way over budget, way overdue, and they were sinking. And it was always my joy to come in and say, how can I help and what can we do? And I cannot help but think that collectively we're doing the same thing with human consciousness. It's not that we're over budget or that the timing isn't right, but we're all collectively managing a massive project. And nothing less than our survival is at stake. And within that survival, key to it is our ability to find joy and love and compassion and understanding and embrace the fact, and it is a fact now, that we're part of all that we see, And if we don't like what's out there, we can change the way we feel, and it changes our world. And some people say, well, Greg, it can't be that simple. And what I say is, in a quantum universe where we affect reality by observation, why would it be any more difficult than that? Children know that. So I think that's kind of where we're going in a really very simplified way. We can make it as complex as we choose. But I think it's actually very simple, and I believe that we will survive. I believe we'll survive together, because if one of us is going to survive, I think we'll all survive. I think we've chosen a difficult, circuitous route. I don't know why. It's just the way we seem to learn, and I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this today. Great.
Well, I really appreciate it. We're just about out of time.
Yeah.
And once again, this is Gregg Braden. Google the Divine Matrix. And Greg, what's your website?
GreggBraden.com, GreggBraden.com. 2 G's means it's not a Gregory.
If you're not familiar with Gregg's work, it's required reading for anybody who's really looking to make that next leap personally, spiritually, emotionally, and be a part of the trend in humanity's evolution as well.
My mom says the same thing, exactly the same thing. It's required reading for her.
Oh, that's awesome. Greg, thank you.
Hey, God bless. Thank you. I want to thank our listeners, our viewers today.